What is going on, everybody? This is the Dave Bullis Podcast. Thank you so much for tuning in. It's been about a month since I uploaded anything. The reason being is I moved, and moving by yourself is it's a real pain in the ass, as I found out. So I've had to move pretty much everything by myself, and it's just taken a lot longer. I've had to do a couple of different things here and there to try to get the house situated. So right now I'm recording this in my kitchen. On my kitchen table. I have an office I was going to use, but it's not quite done yet. So here I am right now. So if this sounds a little bad, it's not only is it 4 o'clock in the morning here, it's also in my kitchen. Really quickly, coming up on the podcast, we have a returning guest, always a popular guy, Steve Kaplan. He just wrote the Comic Hero's Journey. Prior to that, he's been on the podcast twice before. He wrote the book, The Hidden Tools of Comedy. And we also have Jim Uhls coming on, writer of Fight Club. Jim and I have been trying to connect for a while now, and we just couldn't make our schedules work, but I think we finally have a date locked down, and we're in that. Both those episodes will be up before the end of the year. So a lot of really cool stuff to look forward to. And also, I'm still working on my own stuff here and there. I know people have been asking if because I didn't upload for a month. People were asking what happened, and I just ran out of time. I didn't plan on moving, but now that I have my own house here, I'm like, hey, I could film a movie here. How the hell can I do it now? But again, that's stuff I've been working on for next year. So on to this week's episode of the podcast. My next guest, he actually runs his own podcast, the Selling Your Screenplay podcast, which is also at sellingyourscreenplay.com. He also just made his feature film, The Pinch, which he actually wrote and directed. He actually crowdfunded it as well. And the unique part of this is he actually talks about pitching the script to Inktip. He put it on Inktip, and he also put it on the Blacklist, which, in case just in case you're not aware of what those websites are, they actually allow producers to actually check out your script or request your script, and they also let people review your script. So the unique part of that is the fact that is this going to be something that would even pass the gatekeepers, and that we have a whole conversation about that. It's actually really interesting because certain movies may not actually make it past the gatekeepers, but they ended up being very good movies. And we kind of talk about that as well. And so it's kind of an interesting take on things. So without further ado, this is episode 227 with guest Ashley Scott Meyers.
You're listening to the Dave Bullis Podcast.
Yeah, it's been about 2 years since we last talked.
Wow, time flies, man.
Yeah, it was right around, December 2016? Maybe a little before then?
Yeah, I think so, yeah.
Yeah,
it's been a while.
Yeah. So what have you been up to?
So the main thing I've been working on in those 2 years, and we probably had this conversation back then because I was certainly in the thick of it, was going out and producing my own micro budget feature film. So I'm just here to share as many details as I can about that, and I'm totally open to any questions that people have. I don't mind talking about budget, and not only just budget, but where I actually spent that money. But that's basically it. I've gotten the film through post-production now, and we are literally, as we speak, I'm releasing this month of December 2018 on all the various VOD platforms, iTunes and Amazon and Vudu and Google Play, that sort of thing.
Nice, and we're going to talk about that too, because I have a lot of questions about VOD and stuff like that. So it has been about 2 years since we've talked, and I'm actually glad to see that everything has been happening with The Pinch. So just to get started at the beginning,
Sure.
Everything starts with kind of like an idea, and then you go, and then you start to write these things down. So where exactly did you start writing The Pinch?
So yeah, and I'll take even a step further back. So I was at a place, and I think I actually wrote the script. It's probably been 3 years or something since I wrote the script, maybe 4. Man, that seems hard to believe, but at least 3 years, let's say. But my background is in screenwriting, and when I was on your podcast last, I think that's what we talked about, a lot of screenwriting and sellingyourscreenplay.com. That's my blog and podcast. And so I had gotten 2 back-to-back writing assignments in that fall, in September and October. over. And, it's as a screenwriter, it's very, and I'm sure your listeners know this, it's very, very difficult to get those jobs. It takes an enormous amount of work. They're low budget films, so I'm not making a ton of money on them. And I just got done with those writing assignments, and they were not fun or creatively fulfilling experiences. And so I just said, you know what, I need to go out and I need to create my own film. I'm going to write it, I'm going to direct it, and I'm going to produce it. So what I kind of did at that stage, so that was my intent really from the beginning, was to write something that I knew I could shoot. Basically, if it was just me and my friend and a couple actors with a video camera, something that was contained enough that I knew I could just get it done on almost no budget. So that was sort of the genesis. I keep a what I call just sort of an idea bank where I just throw ideas into it. And I had this weird idea, and I'm trying to sort of remember how it, because it always sort of morphs, but I had this sort of idea, just a basic idea of a low-level guy in a sort of a mobster organization getting double-crossed, and then basically taking the mob boss captive and demanding a ransom. And I felt like a lot of the story could be in one house, and that sort of dynamic between the powerful mob boss who's tied up and the guy who is, no less powerful, but in some ways has the power because he's got the gun and the guy tied up. So that was sort of the genesis. It was all part of, going through my idea bank. Like I had these sort of loose ideas, and I think I even combined a couple of ideas. Like I had a little idea over here, a little idea, and I sort of combined them. But I always had an eye for this project on something that I could shoot myself. And even taking it a step further, I also knew that there is a market for these types of scripts, that even if I got done with the script and didn't necessarily feel like going out and shooting it, I knew that I could find somebody, or not necessarily knew, but I hoped that there would be a good chance that I could write the script. And even if I didn't want to make it, I knew that there would be somebody out there that would like it's a kind of a crime thriller script. I knew that there would be somebody out there. I hoped, reasonably confident, I guess is more the way I would phrase it, that I would be able to find a producer who might be interested in this script. But I also knew that, hey, even if I don't do that, I could still go and shoot it myself.
So, and that's a very interesting take. I was actually just talking about something like that with Alex Ferrari, about the whole, hey, if I could, I could shoot this script myself. So when you were writing it, did you kind of have like a checklist of locations and stuff that you could use for this?
Yeah, I wish I could say I did, and in hindsight, I probably should have. I had sort of a loose idea, but I didn't do as well as I probably could have or should have. And when it came time for production, I did have to scramble a little bit on the locations. And in hindsight, like the locations I actually ended up using, for the most part, they were locations that I actually did have access to. So I should have actually probably thought that through. Hey, what locations do I have? Where can I shoot? I knew I had like my house, and we didn't even end up shooting any of it at my house, but I knew I had my house. My parents had a townhouse in this area, so I knew I could potentially shoot there. So there were some sort of loose things, but not as much as I could have or should have. But I also felt like there's a scene in an apartment, and then, as I said, a lot of it takes place in this one house. I felt confident that I could find, like I know enough friends that have an apartment, we could shoot in their apartment. So they were generic locations. They weren't exotic locations. They were very basic locations, a rundown suburban house, a sort of very average apartment building. Like they were locations that I knew, knew is maybe a strong word, but I felt confident that I could get those locations when I needed them. So it wasn't as specific as maybe I could have been, but in the general sense, it was kind of, I knew I could probably find them.
So, just out of curiosity, did you actually film any of this in like your own house?
So no, we didn't. And I have 2 kids, so that was a big consideration. But me and my wife did talk about it. We ended up shooting actually at my wife's granddad's house, and there were some sort of extenuating circumstances why originally I didn't think I'd be able to shoot there, but eventually it did work out. But I was prepared to do that. If we had to, I knew I could shoot it at my house as sort of a worst case scenario. But as I said, we ended up shooting it actually at my wife's granddad's house. So that actually worked out better. And his house was a better fit for the story as well. So it all made perfect sense. But no, we didn't actually shoot at my house.
So I can imagine that conversation, by the way, between your wife and yourself. You're like, hey, I want to shoot a movie here.
Yes.
No.
And the thing is, we shot a movie in 2008 in our house, and so it's film crews are rough. That's the one thing I'll say. Film crews can be kind of rough on locations. They're, generally kind of rough and tumble guys. You got a lot of equipment, heavy equipment. They're banging around. So you do want to be conscious of that. When I actually started to get into pre-production and start looking for locations, I did sort of just put out some feelers for the house. And a lot of it was as simple as going on Craigslist and just in the crew section say, hey, I need a house like this. And I actually got a couple of people that were willing to do it for the budget that I had, which was next to nothing. And I went and looked at actually 2 houses of people I didn't know. And truthfully, I just was worried to do it there. Because this was so low budget, I didn't want to have to you break someone's window and you got a $600 bill fixing their window. I didn't want to get into this situation. This was a real nice lady. Her nephew was in the film business, so he just wanted to kind of be involved in the project. And he's like, oh yeah, we can shoot at my aunt's house. And I went and looked at his aunt's house, and I mean, she had all this antique furniture and stuff. It was like a nice house. I mean, it would have been a cool location, but I was just too scared to do it. Priceless antique furniture. So that was sort of a consideration as well.
Yeah, I could imagine that was you kind of look at that through the producer's eyes. Where you're like, oh my god.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Not through the director's eyes of what's going to visually be the best, but there is that producer hat that I had on that was, man, it could be rough if we break this lady's, antique couch. Yeah,
and it'd be rough to say like, hey, it was like that when we got here, lady. But just going back to writing it. When you were starting to kind of like piece this together, you work a full-time day job, right?
Well, so my schedule, I mean, I run sellingyourScreenplay.com. That's a good portion of my income. And I have another website that I run that's not related to the film business. So I have a pretty flexible schedule. And I do make some money as a screenwriter. I do get some writing assignments and I do sell some scripts. So that's kind of my day. But the bottom line is I do have some pretty good flexibility to kind of work on these things.
Okay, so well, I was going to say, so it kind of changes my question completely. But so when you're writing this, let's just say you did work, let's just say 8 to 10 hours, et cetera. If you were writing this, and you weren't at your desk, you were writing it at night. How long was it before you actually had that finished? Before you had that idea, you had that finished first draft for the pinch?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So and believe me, like a good portion of my screenwriting career, I've had like a 9-to-5, very normal 9-to-5 job. And I would say during those years, I would try and write 2 or 3 scripts per year, just basically working a 9-to-5 job and then writing at nights and on the mornings. I'm sort of a morning person. So for me, it was always getting up before work and writing before work and then going to work and generally not writing at night, but on the weekends and stuff like that. So that's what I would generally do. And I would try and push myself to write, like, let's say 2 scripts a year, sometimes maybe a little more. But generally, I feel like that if someone comes to me and sort of describes what they're doing, I mean, I think 2 scripts a year if you're working a full-time job is a pretty a good pace. It's reasonable, but it's also pushing the ball forward at a reasonable pace. In terms of this one, I did have more flexibility. And typically what I did, like those 2 writing assignments that I talked about, what I would typically do with those, the one writing assignment, the guy needed the script in literally a week. And so I had 6 days to write a full feature script. There was some rewrites after that, but I needed that first draft in 6 days. So obviously those are like 12-hour day, 5 12-hour days or whatever in a row where I'm pumping out the script. So that was a little bit of a unique situation. With the other writing assignment that I got, I would pretty much I would try and write in the morning. So, I get my kids off to school. I come up, around 7:30, 8 o'clock, I'm writing. And on that one, I would write till about lunchtime. So about 4 hours. And I wrote that script in, I think, about a month. With the pinch, because there was no deadline to speak of, it took a little longer. And I think it might have taken me, truthfully, to really get the script honed down, rewrites and everything else. It might have been 6 months. The one thing I'll say, and and again, I was probably writing probably 2 or 3 hours a day is kind of what I would say is ideal. And then the rest of my day was spent working on these other businesses. For me, I feel like giving myself more time, like working a little bit every day. So let's say 2 hours every day. I feel like that actually, if there's no deadline, I feel like that works for me because then kind of the rest of your day, you're kind of mulling things over. I go for a run, I'm eating lunch, and you're kind of mulling these things over. So I feel like the scripts are better when I get, 3 or 4 months to write them and I'm not rushed. And this goes into an even bigger point, which we'll probably talk about when we get into production, post-production. One thing I wanted to do with the pinch, there's always that good, fast, and cheap triangle. You can have 2 of them, but not 3 of them. And the one thing I knew this was going to be low budget, and I knew I wanted it to be good. So I knew it couldn't be quick. And that right from the get-go, I wasn't going to push myself to write this script in a week or 2 weeks or a month. I wanted it to be as good as I could make it. And same thing with pre-production, production, and post-production. I wanted to just take my time, and again, I didn't have a lot of money, so I wanted to, so it had to be cheap, and I wanted it to be good, so I knew it was never going to be quick.
Yeah, well, and that's a good point too. Is about the whole production management triangle, and you have to figure out which one you're going to sacrifice. But and I do want to talk about that too. But just before and as we sort of talk about writing the pinch. As you sort of write write the screenplay, just to kind of pop this question here, what about people who they work a full-time day job and maybe they start missing days because maybe life, they have a family, and what advice would you have for them?
Well, and I've actually gone through some personal issues myself over the last couple months. So I'm very sensitive to that. The one there, there's no super clear answer on these things, and everything is there's nuance to everything, and there's specific circumstances to everything. And I'm working on my latest project, and as I said, I've had some setbacks that nothing to do with my businesses or screenwriting or anything, but they've taken up time, and sometimes you just have to spend time on your life. Screenwriting is not everything. It's not the be all end all, and sometimes there are things that are much more important to it. So that's my first piece of advice. But the sort of the flip side to that is you do have to be disciplined. And that's one of the hardest things about being a screenwriter is especially when you're starting out, there are no deadlines. There is nobody is telling you have to do this. And in fact, most people are probably telling you you're crazy to do it. You're wasting your time doing it. So you have to be disciplined by the same token. Clearly, there's going to be issues that come up, life, important things that you have to deal with. So you definitely need to take care of that. But at some point, you've got to get things in order, and you've got to be disciplined. And I mean, I don't see someone ever making it to the professional level of screenwriting without writing, a good number of spec scripts on their own without a deadline, without someone telling them to do it. So you have to be disciplined, but don't beat yourself up. When life gets in the way and there's other things, don't beat yourself up to it. Just be disciplined and be honest with yourself and do the best you can.
So, is that kind of like a hallmark of what producers look for? Because, you've dealt with a lot of producers. Is that something they look for where they say, hey, this person did it because they were, no one was paying them. They just did it for the love of the game. They maybe have, 2, 3, 4 screenplays, and they kind of they're more willing to talk to you, or maybe, an agent or a manager, not even just a producer. Have you noticed that?
I would say no. I would say, I don't get that sense from producers and agents. It's much more about how good is your script. I don't know that, and I see a lot of query letters come through my system where I'm helping people with query letters, and a lot of people will put some of that stuff in there, like, this is my 4th spec script, and to me, it comes across as kind of amateurish. I mean, nobody at the end of the day cares about my personal problems or how much effort I put into this script. That's not really what's important. The important thing to this other person, the producer, the agent, the manager, the thing that's important to them is not how hard it was for me to write the script. It's how good is the script. And it doesn't always seem fair, and it doesn't always seem nice, but that's, I think, what we have to stay focused on. And I mean, you know this, Dave, from someone who runs a podcast and a business. It really doesn't matter how much time you spend on the business. Nobody cares about that, or how much you love it, or how much passion you have for it. It's how much value you bring to your audience. That's what they care about. Like, we're here to serve as a screenwriter. We're here to service those producers and give the producers value. And I don't think at the end of the day they really care whether you've written one spec script or 1,000 spec scripts, spent 1 hour or 1,000,000 hours on this script. If they like the script, that's what's important to them. That's the value you're giving to them. You're giving them the good script, not necessarily any of the baggage that may come with it.
Yeah, exactly. And this is going beyond, just filmmaking or screenwriting or anything.
It is. That's life.
It's life. Exactly. What value are you bringing to the table?
Yeah. And I mean, some of this, and I know this is not necessarily politically correct, but, the inequities in payment and stuff, it's like at some level, the agents of these female actors, they have to step up to the plate and they have to prove that the value is there. And that's really what it comes down to. We're bringing people value. It's not like, well, this isn't fair. This person's making more money. This person, it's like, it's all about value. How much value are you bringing to the project? At the end of the day, that has to be what ultimately determines our pay. And again, going back to my own business, like nobody cares how much time or passion I put into selling your screenplay. The people that come to my service and buy my screenwriting products, they just want to help themselves. They want to get the value from the products. And that's what we have to stay focused on. If you want to be successful, you have to stay focused on how much value you can bring to other people, not how much value they can necessarily bring to you, because they don't care about that. They care about themselves.
Right, yeah. And I think if out of the gate a lot more people understood that, I think it would be a lot, there would be a more in line or in focus expectations, because you hear it all the time. Hey, I love I love movies, this and that, but it's like, okay, that's cool, but what exactly is the screenplay actually an original voice? All that stuff. I mean, because and you because you do a podcast yourself. I've had different producers on, and you can hear different things from them, and what they're saying and what they're actually kind of hinting at. It's like, how do you how do you get in front of these guys? Well, it's how do you do it? Well, there's a lot of different ways, but it all comes down to you have to kind of stand out. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And people, and I get these emails, and frankly, I'm sure you and all the filmmaking podcasters out there, I get a lot of people emailing me saying, hey, can you read my script, or can you watch my movie? And it's like, time is finite. Like, you have to remember when you go to a producer and say, hey, can you read my script? You're asking them for a really big favor, and maybe you don't appreciate that, but that producer's got to take, I'm a slow reader. So when someone asks me to read their script and give them notes, like, it's literally going to take me 6 hours. So that's the better part of one working day that they're asking me to invest in their script. And that's a big ask for somebody that doesn't know you. And that's essentially what we're doing as screenwriters. We're pitching to these producers, hey man, can you read my script? Can you check it out? Here's my logline. You're asking them for a favor. And the key is trying to understand that so that you can somehow bring value to them. And one of the things I recommend to screenwriters is, for instance, how can you add value to that producer? One of the things you can do, which I can tell you every producer in the world will really appreciate, is bringing some of the funding of the movie. Like, if you can go to a producer and say, listen, this movie, I did a budget with a professional blind producer. We've got it budgeted at, let's say, $250,000, and I've already raised $100,000 of it. Like, you're bringing them, well, let's just say, to make the math easy, $200,000, you bring them 50%, $125,000 of the $250. You're bringing them 50% of the budget. That's like, then you're bringing some real value to that equation. Now, obviously, the producers are in the business of finding good material, so there's a little bit that's part of the gig, is they have to read a bunch of really bad scripts to find that good one. That's part of what they signed up for. But just really understand, if you're a screenwriter asking a producer, an agent, or manager, these people are busy people, and you're asking them for a big favor. And why? Why should they do you, who they don't know? Why should they do you a big favor?
Yeah. Is there ever an answer besides what we just talked about?
Yeah, I'm trying to think. I mean, anything you can do to add value to that project. If you can attach an actor, if you can find a name actor, and I'm not talking about some, your brother's cousin who did that theater performance last summer in Woodstock. If you can find a real name actor and you can somehow get him attached to the project and go to the producer, like anything, think about what the producer is going to have to do if he likes your script and he wants to go out and produce it. What is going to be the stumbling blocks for him? What are the hard parts of his job? I can tell you what they are. The hardest parts of his job are going to be raising the money, and they're going to be attaching name talent to the project. Those are the two most difficult things for the independent producer. So if you can do one or two of those things for that producer, you're bringing a lot of value to that producer. You're making his life a lot easier. And I guarantee you, if you have a budget done, you've got a $250,000 movie, you've got half the budget, and you've got a name talent actor attached to that project, there's not too many independent producers who wouldn't read that script because you've done so much of the work for them. You're bringing them so much value and you're making their life so much easier. I mean, and your question is a good one. And I don't know, I'd have to maybe think about it, but think about the steps the producer is going to go through. And, it's not enough that your mother loved the script or your brother thought the script was fantastic and would make an excellent movie. Like, that's not really bringing a lot of value to the project. I see that sort of stuff in query letters all the time. I mean, I don't think most producers are really all that concerned about what your mom thought of the script. But they are concerned if Tom Cruise is attached to that script. That's actually has value to them.
Yeah, exactly. And just when putting something together, I've heard a lot of the term I've always kind of gone with when I heard early on was, what's your USP, unique selling position, or what's our unfair advantage? Yeah, I mean, mm-hmm. And you've heard that too, and you got to kind of, if you're gonna start packaging something, you got to kind of figure that to attract certain people. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and as you said that, actually that occurred to me as well. Another way, and this is not as like those two things I mentioned, name talent and financing. Like if you asked 100 independent producers what their biggest hurdles were, I'm pretty sure those would be on the top one or two items out of almost all 100 producers. Now, there are other things as well that I think you could potentially do. For instance, if you are a lawyer and maybe you could offer some legal service. Say, hey, I've written this script, and by the way, I could potentially offer some legal services if this thing went into production, because you're always going to need legal services on any kind of a film production. Maybe too, if you were a policeman, for instance, maybe there's some assets you could bring there. Hey, I've been a policeman on the LAPD for 20 years. I got a lot of friends. I could bring a lot of production value. I could bring a lot of police cars, guys in uniforms. I've got a lot of friends in uniform. Maybe you could bring something like that. If you've worked as a policeman, maybe just even something like that would be enough. Hey, I worked as a policeman for 20 years. I have a lot of insight into how the LAPD works, and I've written this script that is, it's a crime thriller based in the world of the LAPD, and I really know that world. Like, again, you're adding a little bit of sort of value to that for the producer, because then the producer, he might say, well, we need to go hire a consultant on this project to make sure that everything actually makes sense. But if you offer that, hey, I've been on the LAPD 20 years, that is not as valuable as a name actor or financing. But those sort of subtle things, I think, can add up and, again, add value. And when you're pitching a producer, anything you can do to add value. And again, the fact that your mom liked the script or the fact that you spent 1,000 hours on the script, those do not necessarily give value to the producer.
And it's like someone once told me as well. So nobody really cares how long the movie took to write. Nobody actually says, oh my God, I imagine that movie, the guy wrote it in 3 days or whatever, you know what I mean? So it's really just all about how it came together and how entertaining it is and all that other good stuff. But as we get back to talking about writing the pinch, as we were talking about in the pre-interview, you actually put it on the blacklist.
Correct. Yep. So when I got done the script, I was still in my mind, I thought, hey, I could probably go out and shoot this, but I kind of figured, why not run it through sort of my typical marketing channels as a screenwriter? And so at the time, I did all the typical things. I use my own services at sellingyourscreenplay.com. I don't want to just shill those services, but I use Inktip as another service that I recommend, and The Blacklist is another service. I have a number of producers that I just know from my past experience as a screenwriter. So I did all the normal things with this script like I do with any spec script that I write. I sort of ran it up the flagpole with all of those, and just to kind of see where it lands. And some of the conversation, we were talking about The Blacklist versus Inktip and stuff. And for me, The Blacklist, I don't think The Pinch was a real good fit for The Blacklist. I think it was maybe a better fit for Inktip. And that's kind of what I see as the difference. I would say, be honest with yourself, figure out what kind of a script you have, and that will determine what marketing channels are going to be best suited for it. My own personal thoughts and experience on that is that the agents, the managers, and producers that are on The Blacklist, I don't know that they're on there really looking to buy scripts and produce them. I think they might be more looking for good writing samples to hire a screenwriter or to sign a client. And I think Franklin Leonard, who runs The Blacklist, he has a background in development. So I think he's done a good job bringing in some pretty heavy hitters. So, but look at the types of scripts, and if you log into The Blacklist, you can see what scripts are getting good ratings. And there's a lot of these sort of what I would call Academy Award type dramas, and that do really well on The Blacklist. I saw one about, it was about Hillary Clinton back when she was some sort of a legal aid, back in the 70s or something, these sort of dramas. And like, there's very few of those movies that ever get made, but they serve as good writing samples because they're sort of high-end dramas. Whereas Inktip, I think there's a lot of sort of more independent producers using Inktip. So if you have something like The Pinch, that's kind of lower budget, very much sort of a genre movie. In my case, this was a sort of a crime thriller, sort of a Reservoir Dogs-ish crime thriller. I think something like Inktip is probably a better fit, because the producers that are on Inktip, I have not found, at least, they're not looking for writing samples. They're actually looking to produce, fairly low budget contained scripts. And you can look this up. I mean, again, go to IMDb and look Inktip up and look at the types of movies that have actually been produced from Inktip. Typically, they're movies, again, more like my movie, The Pinch, sort of a lower budget genre movies. Obviously at a higher level than what I did with The Pinch, but they're sort of more in that ilk, as opposed to the Academy Award drama, which I think has sort of fares better in contests. And The Blacklist, as I said, to some degree, it's kind of like a contest. It's sort of an ongoing contest, because you get ratings from readers, and if you get good ratings, then you kind of move on to the next level.
Yeah, so as I was talking to you before, I've had friends who've put scripts on The Blacklist, and they've had various degrees of success. So it's like, what is it, like 7 and up is a recommend, or 8 and up is a recommend?
Yeah, and I haven't been on it for a couple years, so don't quote me on this. But my recollection was that if you got an 8, then you would go into their weekly newsletter of, scripts that got a good rating. And so they would kind of highlight you a little bit if you got an 8. Now, if you got about an average, so if you get 2 ratings, and let's just say your average is a 6, they also have like these top lists, and you can be on like the monthly top list or the quarterly top list or the annual top list, depending on your rating. And it usually hovers around a 6 as like an average rating. And for The Pinch, I got one rating, which is a 4, which was, the reader thought it was basically garbage. That's like the lower 20% of the scripts. But I got another rating, which an 8, which an 8 is a really good thing. But the bottom line was my average was a 6. So at least for a month or a quarter or something, I was on their top list. And again, I got that 8. So my script did go out onto their newsletter. I didn't feel like I got a ton of exposure, even though I did get at least one good rating. I think I got 5 downloads. I don't quote me on that, but it wasn't more than a sort of a handful of downloads from that. But again, I'm not sure that the Pinch is right for The Blacklist. So I would say, do your own due diligence and kind of experiment. One of the things that I think, though, people sort of make a mistake with is, as someone who has done a lot of marketing, and I'm on these entrepreneurial podcasts and marketing blogs and marketing podcasts to market my own products, Selling Your Screenplay and stuff. And one of the keys I think that people need to understand about marketing is that even the best marketers in the world, selling their info product or whatever, even they don't know exactly what's going to work for those products. I mean, obviously, the more experience you have, the better you might be able to make a guess at it. But there's a lot of trial and error. And that's one thing that, again, the thing is really, as I listen to a lot of these really top marketers in the world, one thing that always comes back to it's that it's not that they are so much smarter that they know exactly how to market this product. It's that they know it's going to take some time and there's going to be some channels that just don't work. And for myself, when I started out as a screenwriter, I entered a lot of contests, but I never did much. For some reason, I never really did very well in contests. So for whatever reason, that's not a good fit for me. But I always did pretty well when I went directly to producers. I never did that well with agents and managers either. I did have a few agents and managers over the years, but I always did pretty well with actually going to producers. And I'm not entirely sure that I fully know why. And I've spent a lot of time thinking about it over the years, but I think one of the reasons is because I do have sort of a practical side to me, and I think a lot of my scripts are written with sort of production in mind. I understand that, having this party scene with a helicopter and, 100, super hot people swimming in a pool, like that's going to be an expensive scene to shoot. Not that you can't have that, but, understand what that actually means to you and understand where your script actually is. Again, this is where you have to be honest with yourself and you have to take a step back and really look at it. Like, what type of a script do I have? Who is going to produce this? How are they going to produce this? And then you can figure out what marketing channel is going to work. But I also would really emphasize, don't take my word for it. Try it yourself. Try everything. Just try everything out there and don't be hesitant. And if something starts to work, again, for me, it was submitting directly to producers. That's what worked for me. So what I did originally, I was just getting ads out of the back of Hollywood Reporter, Daily Variety, and I was just submitting to these producers. But once I saw that that was something that worked for me, I scaled it up. And that's kind of, frankly, how Selling Your Screenplay kind of came to be. Was I eventually, over the years, I built these very, very large databases of producers, and I would send my pitches directly to producers. And almost every credit that I have on IMDb can be traced back to a cold query letter in one way or another, just a cold pitch query letter to a producer. And, I would encourage anybody on listening to this podcast, go and look me up on IMDb and you can look at my credits. You can see what kind of scripts I've sold. But none of my scripts, none of the projects I've sold, none of the writing assignments I've ever had has been through an agent or a manager. It's through myself. And for the most part, that's been me pitching directly to producers. Again, that's what works for me. That may not work for you. So maybe contests are a better fit for you. Maybe the Blacklist is a better fit for you. Maybe Inktip or Virtual Pitch Fest. Maybe my own Selling Your Screenplay service. There's a number of different services out there, and don't be afraid to spend a little money and try them out and find out what works for you. If you see a little light, if something works a little bit, double down on that and figure out how you can scale that and do more of what's working.
Yeah, it's that was a lot there, actually. So
yeah, that was a lot. Sorry.
No, it was okay. I was good. I have a couple follow-ups, but I was like, where do I go from there? No, it's all good. Again, as we talk about kind of writing competitions as well, like I've submitted stuff in the past, and as I kind of took a step back, I would say, maybe this wasn't the right project to put in a writing competition because it's, you know what I mean? It's so kind of out there that they may, you know what I mean? Like, you don't really know if there'd be a fit for that anywhere. You know what I mean? Like, it's one of those movies you have to kind of see. And I kind of go, like a movie like Clerks, for instance. I don't think the script for that would have won any writing competitions at all. But
I totally agree. But
it's a great movie, though. It's just because you have to kind of see it. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And I'm trying to think, and that's a good, like, just as sort of a, a thought experiment. Like, if I had written Clerks and I had that script, like, what would I do with it? I think you're totally right. I just, like, no producer on Inktip or the Blacklist, frankly, would be interested in that type of movie. I think something like Clerks, if that's what you've written, you've got to just go do it yourself. Because it's not, I mean, it's just not a marketable film. That's a movie you got to do yourself. Exactly what you're saying. You kind of got to see that movie. It doesn't fit into a box where a producer is going to be able to say, oh yes, well, I can do this or I can do that. It doesn't have a clear market. It doesn't have a clear avenue to recouping the money.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. You kind of have, and we have a lot more mediums, at our disposal today, which we're going to get to in just a little bit. But so once you had written the pinch and you had kind of put it on the blacklist and here and there, what point did you say, I'm just going to go make this myself?
I'm sorry. Say that again.
So
you kind of broke up.
Oh no, I'm sorry. So at what point did you start to say, after you put the pinch on the blacklist, at what point did you say, I'm going to go make this myself?
Yeah. That's an excellent question. So I put it up on the blacklist, and as I said, I got, and the rating, as I said, I got a 4 and an 8. The 4 came out first. And I was kind of disappointed. I was kind of like, maybe this thing really is a piece of garbage. And I then got the 8, and I was a little bit encouraged. I was like, okay. And I then presented it to my writers group. Most of the group, to be honest, didn't think that much of the script. I mean, it wasn't like they thought it was complete garbage, but I could tell a good portion of the group was not really digging it. But one of the writers came up to me after I had presented the whole script in a full read to my writers group, and he came up to me, and I could tell he really, really liked it. And I started to think, okay, so it seems to be one of those scripts that some people really like, some people don't. And then I did the same thing with my own script analysis service. I was kind of just curious to get some notes, and I submitted it anonymously to my own script analysis service. And I know my own readers, so I kind of know what they like and stuff. And it was the same thing. One of my readers thought it was a complete piece of garbage, but one of my other readers really, really liked it. And to be honest with you, and I remember reading that review when it came in, and I actually was out somewhere and I saw it come through the system, and I looked at it, and he really dug the script. And it wasn't just that he dug it. And it was the same thing with the guy on the blacklist, the guy who liked it. Like, what I wrote was sort of a Guy Ritchie, Quentin Tarantino, Reservoir Dogs. It was sort of that tongue-in-cheek, crime thriller movie. And they really, really liked it. And that's when I said, you know what, maybe this is a good movie to do as a micro-budget feature, because it's not everybody's going to like it, but the people who did like it, they seem to really, really like it. And, for a small movie, I think that's very important. For a small movie, you don't need everybody to like it or even a lot of people to like it, but the people who do like it, you need them to really, really like it so that they tell their friends and they pass it along and they help you market that. So truthfully, that was literally the moment when I read that second review from my own script consultant, and I was like, wow, he really did. It had been, I had 3 sort of confirmations that yes, a lot of people weren't digging it, but a few people were really digging it. That's why I said, you know what, this is a good one, and I'm going to go out and I'm going to make it. And that was probably in like July of whatever it was, 2015 or 16 when I started this. And then within a month, I had shot my Kickstarter video, and I was off to the races. I was committed to going ahead and actually getting it produced.
So, and you've seen, different movies, over the past couple of years where, it's almost like what you were just talking about, where maybe Paranormal Activity, again, if you read that screenplay, you would not have been like, "Oh yeah, this is it." You know what I mean? It's something you have to see. So just to kind of put a thought on that, because I mean, when I saw Paranormal Activity, and I heard about it, and I actually watched it. It's one of those things that stuck with me, where I'm like, the screenplay for this is probably, it's probably not gonna knock your socks off, but then when you see the movie, you're like, oh, now I get it. You know what I mean? So, so as you decided to crowdfund the pinch. What were some of the the good and the bad sort of crowdfunding for a film that you experienced? Actually?
Yeah. So and as I mentioned to you sort of before we started the interview, like I really appreciate other people that are transparent and talk about numbers. If you have me back on in a year, I'll be able to come back on and I'll be happy to tell you like exactly how much money I made and from each channel. I can't tell you that now because I haven't done it. I don't know. But in terms of the budget, at the end of the day, I think I'm at about maybe $32,000. I raised about $12,000 on Kickstarter. The rest of it was basically funded. I put in whatever the math. I had another friend put in $5,000, and you can do the math on this. So maybe I put in like 11 or 12 of my own money into the thing. So we're basically at like about $32,000. And as I said, about 12 of it was raised through Kickstarter. What the good and the bad of Kickstarter was, you get money. You get money to make your movie. That's the upside. But it's not, it's not free money. You do have to do some work for it. And the only thing I can say is, if you've never been through it, it's kind of emotionally taxing. I would say that's the biggest thing. The work, like I don't mind work. Like I enjoy a lot of the work that I do. So I don't mind. That wasn't the hard part. It was a lot of work. And there's always that thing like, well, gee, for the amount of work I did, could I just earn $12,000? Like there's always that thing. You're always sort of thinking like there's at some point there's like a math problem. If you're only going to raise $1,000 on Kickstarter, well, how hard would it be to just go make $1,000? So there's that math issue. But for me, I think that was not a problem. The work I enjoyed doing, so that was it. But there is a lot of work, so understand that going into it. I also had been running Selling Your Screenplay and had a podcast. I had been doing it for at least a couple years by the time I did the Kickstarter, and so I already had kind of an audience as well that I could share this with. And what I did was I turned it into kind of a, hey guys, I'm doing this thing and I'm going to share with you the details and my trials and tribulations, and as I go through this process, and maybe you can do it too. So again, from my perspective, what I was trying to do is I was trying to give, going back to what we were talking about a minute ago, I was legitimately trying to give value to my listeners and say, and I was honest, like the ups and downs. I tried to be as honest as possible with it, with the audience. And you can go back and listen to those podcast episodes during that time period and hear kind of my thoughts on that. But the biggest sort of downside to Kickstarter, which you don't fully appreciate until you've been through it, is that it's, I won't say humiliating, but essentially at the end of the day, you are just out there like begging for money. Hey man, can you kick in a couple dollars? And I, by design, I didn't go to my friends and family. Obviously, my friends and family, some of them heard about it and they did contribute, but I wasn't like one of these guys on my Facebook, trying to beg money from my high school buddies that I hadn't seen in 20 years. That just felt so distasteful to me that I just wouldn't do it. And it didn't feel like something that was particularly scalable, meaning that I could do it maybe once, but it was nothing that I could ever go back and do a second time. But there is this sort of, you're putting yourself out there with a Kickstarter campaign, and there's this fear that you might fail, and it's very much a public failing. I mean, everybody can see you're trying to raise this money and you can't raise it. So there's just this emotional thing you're going through. The money kind of you get the email from Kickstarter. Oh, this person just kicked in $20. This person kicked $100, and those are sort of the emotional highs. But then as time is going on, like during the middle weeks, and like I did a 4-week Kickstarter, which I think is pretty traditional, and like I would say almost literally all the money came in the first week and the last week. Those 2 weeks in the middle, almost no money came in. And that is after the first week, like I think I started on a Monday. My goal was 12,000. I started on a Monday, and by that Sunday, I had like $5,600. I was almost to the halfway mark. And I thought, man, I should have gone for more money. I should have actually tried to get more, gone for 25,000. This is going to be easy. But then those middle weeks kicked in, and like nothing was coming in. And in fact, and I talked about this on one of my podcast episodes, people can actually, during that 30-day process, they can actually pull which makes sense. I mean, they can pull their money back and say, you know what, on second thought, I don't want to contribute to this. So I literally was going, during those middle 2 weeks, I was actually going down. Like I had a few, and there were like some bigger contributors actually pull out for some reason. I don't know why. They never contacted me or anything like that. I think they just got cold feet. This person put $100, this person $300. I had a bunch of those people actually pull the money out. So I actually went down after that first week, and it's emotionally taxing. It's kind of humiliating. And I was very concerned that at the end of the month, I actually would not hit my goal. And again, I was doing this all very publicly on my podcast, talking about it throughout the whole process. And so that, to me, was the biggest downside to it. And it may sound kind of trivial if you've never done it, but it's kind of a little bit, you're putting yourself out there in a very public way, and it may not go the way you want it to.
Yeah, it's and that happens to everyone in crowdfunding, where they have that kind of a middle lull. One of the best crowdfunding campaigns that I've ever seen with a friend.
And I was actually thinking about, for my next one, I'm starting pre-production on my next project. I was almost thinking of doing like a 10 or 12 day Kickstarter campaign, so you don't have that middle week. You got the first week and you got the last week. And I'm curious to almost try that. I've tried to like Google and see if anybody's done it before, and it doesn't seem like people are really thinking that way. But to me, it almost seems like I should do that. Just do 2 weeks or less. You'd want 2 weekends, because the weekends, at least for me, for whatever reason, the weekends seem to be the best, where people got excited, or maybe they were home. I don't know, but I seem to get a lot of the money. The first Saturday and Sunday and the last Saturday and Sunday is when most of the money came through. So I was kind of thinking like a 10-day, 2 weekends over the course of 10 days might be a better strategy. I haven't tried that, so certainly don't quote me on that. But that might be my next idea.
Well, actually, I was about to say was, doing a 2 week, I've heard that before, and I've actually seen a few of them that have done that, where there is no middle week, and it has been able to, where they have just the beginning, and they say, hey, and also it benefits in another way is that the fact that people aren't getting just like tired of hearing about it. You know what I mean? Because you have friends on social media, and they're just like, all right, what we've seen this for 3 weeks, 4 weeks, or whatever, and people generally get a little tired of it. Even what I mean? It's because it's kind of like And
I know exactly what you mean, because I get a lot of the people, I'm on the receiving end of a lot of that too, is people reach out to me, hey, can you contribute to my Kickstarter? And I start getting their daily updates. And, I know that's like the conventional wisdom. You got to keep your audience engaged, and you got to have a lot of content and stuff, but, it can get exhausting on the receiving end. You just got to think these things through, and really, again, it's all about value. It's all about, how can, not just, hey man, can you give me money so I can make my film? It's about how can I give you value for your time and your money and your effort, and be involved in this project, and sending out sort of very generic emails every day to your audience, that doesn't provide a lot of value to them.
Yeah, and that's exactly right. Your audience kind of gets tired of hearing the message, and so that's why I think, I've learned a lot about just crowdfunding from actually doing it, and also seeing what from my friends of mine, and by the way, I also get that a lot. Like, hey Dave, you've donated to this, can you help me? Hey Dave, you have a podcast, can you give out? And eventually I'm just kind of like I can't do it, because otherwise every episode I would literally be shouting out like five crowdfunding campaigns. I would be donating to like 10. Eventually you're like, my God, I don't have the money or the time. And it's sad too, because I've donated to some crowdfunding campaigns in the past, Ash, and let me tell you, some of them just the people have gone dark. They've just gone completely just disappeared. I saw one guy who raised $25,000 for a short film, and once he got it, he just disappeared.
Yeah. Yeah, and truthfully, I'd be willing to bet that those people are not shysters or scammers. They're just disorganized. They got in over their head, and they just bit off more than they could chew. They didn't have bad intentions, but that's just the way it worked out. I think actually, coincidentally, Dave, I think that's how we met. I think you actually contributed to my the Pinch Kickstarter, and that's how we actually started to engage.
Really?
Yeah, I think it is. I think that's when we first talk. But I'm in the same position you are, as I get emails almost every day saying, hey, can you have me on your podcast? I'm doing a Kickstarter. And it's my response to them is always the same. Hey, well, how can you provide my audience with value? You coming on begging for money doesn't give my audience value. It's about giving value. It's not about getting value,
Exactly. Yeah. And they have. See, I always say to them, like, too, you have to kind of frame it in a story. And this is just being perfectly honest, because if you just come, like you just said, if you come on and just ask for money, everyone's just going to go, well, I'm going to pass on this episode. That's why you have to you do have to give something to get something, and you have to be willing to talk about what this movie is or whatever, and how it relates to you, and why it's different, and how it's going to be different, and why people would want to see it.
And yeah, and I think your podcast is probably similar to mine. A lot of what I have on my podcast is filmmakers with completed films. And I feel like that is a more, again, there's giving value and there's getting value. I think both parties are giving and receiving value. The filmmaker gets to come on and promote his film that just got done, and the audience gets to learn how that film was made and sort of the insides, the nuts and bolts of writing and potentially producing a movie. So that's where I think it is an even exchange of value. On the audience gets value and the guest coming on. And that's really what I think you need to strive for in everything in life. Again, we're talking about more than just screenwriting or filmmaking, is that, giving and receiving equal value is so important in a relationship.
Right, yeah. So, and it's also to avoid the people who just do the whole DM campaigns where they just mass email or mass tag people and stuff. I mean, and those people never listen to podcasts like this, or even listen to YouTube advice or advice from anybody. So exactly. And that's why when I always tell people about crowdfunding, they're like, "How can I do it?" And I go, "It's a full-time job. You're going to annoy all your friends and family. I guarantee you, everybody I've ever known who's done a crowdfunding campaign has annoyed their friends and family. And it's just, you have to accept these things and then kind of go into the fire. And then you have stuff like that where people, charge back, or maybe they back out because they get cold feet, or whatever the reason is. And then you have people who, like in my situation, where, well, not my situation, the guy I knew, where he raised $25,000 for a short film and he just vanished off Facebook everywhere. And I actually emailed him eventually, and people were actually asking, like, "Hey, whatever happened with this?" Facebook went down, Twitter went down, and then I emailed him, and I could see that he opened it, and I got no response. And I'm imagining that he probably, I don't want to say, I think a very, very small amount of people would ever just be like, "Hey, I'm going to crowdfund it to get money for this month's rent." I think what happened most of the time is people don't know how to crunch numbers before they crowdfund. And what happens is they get into an oh shit moment where they realize, like, this is going to be a lot more money than I thought it was going to be. And that, by the way, I actually have more respect for people who come out and do that and say that than people who just go, "Oh, you know what, I'm just going dark." Because I actually have known a couple of people who've said, "Hey, look, they raised a pretty good amount of money. And when the time came, nothing. Like they said, I couldn't do it. Well, I thought I could do it." I'll give you another example. It was a photographer that I knew that he was going to make he was going to make a pilot for this kind of like web series, and he was going to wait for the first one to take off on YouTube, get a little ad revenue with it, and then he was going to use the rest of the crowdfunding money to make episodes 2, 3, etc. And what happened was, he raised a pretty good amount of money and he made nothing, and just said, I can't. He goes, "Hey, this is way more than I thought it was going to be." So again, stuff like that happens, but at least if it does, I say be transparent and try to give everyone some kind of money back at that, or something back. You know what I mean? So
yeah, and as a person who donates to Kickstarters, looking at the person that's running them, I mean, what kind of a track record do they have? I mean, it's have they done films before? Have they done something that shows a certain level of professionalism or maturity and stuff? I think doing some, at least minor due diligence on that. But that's why people are so, hesitant to part with their money, is because they hear about these stories of people just disappearing with the money and not producing, not doing what they say. And no one is into Kickstarter. No one gives in Kickstarter. They're not doing it to make money or anything. They're truly doing it to support the arts and that kind of thing. But by the same token, you have to be respectful, and they do expect you to produce this movie. I mean, they don't want to think that they got scammed. Like, nobody wants to feel like they got cheated or scammed. And I agree with you. If you raise $25,000, you can't produce the movie, you have a moral obligation to give the entire amount of money back, because you're not doing what you said.
Yeah, and it's unfortunate when that happens, because that really does hurt other people. So if it's happened to you, anybody, I say always give that person hell. Because trust me, man, I've had friends, and just before we move on to actually producing the pinch, I've had friends who they saw me crowdfund, and they thought they could do it, and then they were in the oh shit phase, like, oh my god, this is more work than I thought it was going to be. Not even just making the movie, but crowdfunding, everything. And I've told people before, I said, if I'm sitting here and I have to help you and your campaign's halfway done, I said, is it possible to come out of a nosedive? Absolutely. But is it likely? Not really. And the thing is at that point, what am I getting out of this? Am I getting money? Am I getting credit? And I've had people who that actually happened, where I had a person I used to know who actually came in. I gave her a ton of crowdfunding advice for 3 projects, and I said, never do this again. I said, you are not a crowdfunding person. You don't know what you're doing. You're just you're feeling around in the dark. And she kind of used my creds as her creds. And, all of a sudden now she's in the dark. And I helped her, and then at the end she didn't even give me a thank you. I was not mentioned anywhere on these campaigns, nothing, man. And I was like, what the hell is this? You know what I mean? And I called her on it, and we're not friends anymore. So
yeah.
So you know what I mean? So you get stuff like that. But I'm sorry, not to go too far away from the pinch. But once you successfully crowdfunded, Ashley, you start to actually film this, and you were talking about locations a little earlier. And you wanted to do this with the production manager triangle. You wanted to do this. You wanted to do this cheap, and you wanted to do this good. So you had to do it slow. So did you shoot this over weekends at a time?
No, I didn't, and that was definitely a consideration. But I felt like there would be. So I finished my crowdfunding. Let's say I think around February of that year. I think it must have been 2000. Was it 16 or 15? Now I can't remember. But 2016. So I did the crowdfunding, and then that we shot in July, and we shot over the course of 15 days. I did think about we did shoot on the weekends though. So what we would shoot Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and I can explain that in a minute. But I felt like it would add a little more professionalism if I could just do it like a real movie shoot. Basically a 5-day working week for 3 weeks. So it was a 15-day shoot over the course of 3 days, just a 5-day working week, although it was a little odd, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. But I just think this was a little bit bigger. I mean, the cast was a little bit bigger. This wasn't just 2 people sitting in a house. And so you would have had some continuity issues. And I felt like just for the professionalism, let's make it feel like a real shoot. Everyone's coming to work every day, and we're going to get through this in 3 weeks. So that's what we did.
Yeah. So because when you're putting it together, putting together like a feature film, it can be very hard. And so did you do? And the reason what I'm trying to actually say is it's really hard for just getting cast and crew, because sometimes you can't make everyone's schedules gel. Yeah. So and you were talking before about a skeleton, using a smaller crew, because again, you don't have the money to hire 20 people to come in, and everyone's doing their own thing. So when you're doing something like this, how hard was it to schedule everything?
So here's the thing, and I'm in Los Angeles, so we shot this in Los Angeles, and as far as cast and crew goes, like finding people in LA to work for very low pay in the movie business is not hard in LA. And a lot of the actors, a lot of the crew people, they have set their schedules up, whether they're waiters at night or whether they work or whether they can take off. They have flexible enough schedules where they can take off for a few weeks. There's a lot of people that are trying to do this in LA, so it was not frankly that difficult. In fact, that was sort of the easy part. The flip side to that, and I'll just talk about this for a minute. The flip side, and you've got to figure out like where you are. Are you in Los Angeles? Are you not in Los Angeles? The thing that is more difficult in Los Angeles is the locations, because in LA, you've got, CBS Studios and Universal Pictures. They're out there renting locations. So when you go to a location and say, hey, I've got a film shoot, they're like, oh, great, it's $5,000 a day. And, that's not on a $30,000 budget. That's not in the cards. And so getting the locations and that sort of stuff, you have to be more careful about shooting on public streets in LA. You're supposed to have permits. So you're dealing with that. Those are the things that are harder. But the cast and crew in LA, mean, there's no shortage of actors that are willing and ready to work for low pay. They just want to be in a cool project. And frankly, the same thing for crew. Now, no, I didn't get the most experienced crew. Most of my actors, though, frankly, had quite a bit of experience. I would say at least half of them have some significant acting credits. But because you have this density of people that just want to work. I mean, even the most successful working actor has a lot of downtime, and a lot of times they just want to work. And so if you can catch them when they don't have a paid gig, I mean, my lead actor, again, look him up on IMDb. He's been in some big movies. He does a lot of commercials, a lot of TV shows. He's a good actor. He's a professional actor. But for him, he's not at that level where he's getting starring roles in feature films. He's getting sort of smaller roles, guest starring roles on TV shows. And so for him, and I asked him this, I was like, why at the end of the day, why'd you do this? And for him, it was a cool project, and it was a good exercise just to have that continuity, to be a lead in a feature film, and to have that sort of challenge of actually being the lead, having to memorize. I mean, he's in almost he might be in every single scene, maybe not every scene, but he's in 98% of all the scenes. So he had to memorize the whole script. So again, it's going back to this, it's giving and getting value. He got value out of it. Even though I didn't pay him a lot of money, he got value out of it because it was a good exercise for him to really work his acting chops. And you can find those guys in LA. Outside of LA, you're going to have the opposite problem. You're probably going to have cast and crew issues, but it's not going to be that hard to go down to the local restaurant and say, hey, we're going to shoot a movie. Could we shoot over in this corner, at 6 a.m. one morning? And a lot of restaurants outside of LA, they might think that that's just a cool thing to do, and they might even offer to give you some free food. That kind of thing is going to be easier outside of LA. You're not going to have to worry about permits. You're not going to have to worry about getting shut down. I mean, in LA, you got to worry about the neighbors. Like, everybody in LA is so sophisticated. If you annoy the neighbors, they know who to call. They know how to call the police and get your production closed down. So those are the kinds of things you've got to be kind of concerned about in LA. But to answer your question, I know that's a really long-winded answer, but to answer your question, cast and crew, frankly, was not a big problem.
So what was your biggest problem while filming the Pinch?
I think during pre-production, the locations were the biggest thing. I had a lot of sleepless nights sweating it out, trying to figure out where I was going to shoot this. And I know it sounds very simple, that at the end of the day, I just shot at my wife's grandfather's house. That was our main location. But there was a bunch of just extenuating circumstances where I didn't think that was going to be a viable option up until about maybe 2 or 3 weeks before we started shooting. So I was looking at houses and trying to figure this out, and I didn't have a lot of good options. And that was the biggest challenge in pre-production. In production, it's going to be the biggest challenges in production, it's the same thing for everybody, is that you just never have enough time to get the shot quite the way you want it. You never have enough time to do that extra take. I mean, you're a 15-day shoot. It sounds like a long time, but to shoot, an 85-page script in 15 days, you're moving very, very quickly. And so that was the biggest challenge in production. In post-production, in post-production, cast and crew in LA is not a problem, but in post-production, it was difficult. It was difficult because those positions, like your dialogue editor and your sound mixer and your sound design, like those guys that do that, they're very technical jobs, and frankly, they don't care about the credits. Like most people in this country could not name a single sound designer or a single, Foley expert. Those are not like high profile gigs. And so I couldn't find anybody that would work for low pay on those. So in post-production, that was the biggest issue, just finding competent people, good quality people that were willing to work for very, very low pay, because those are grueling jobs too. I mean, being the dialogue editor on a project like this, it's very meticulous. You're going through all the sound files and your clipping files, you're editing sound files. It's a lot of work. And I didn't have a lot of money to pay the person. So that was the biggest challenge in post-production. And it has to be professional. At the end of the day, I'm trying to sell this movie and make a professional movie. So there's certain quality standards that you have to meet. To even get on iTunes and Amazon, you have to go through a QA process. So there are those things that you have to be mindful of. It's not like you're just going to show this to your friends. So, the sound has to be properly, leveled and those kinds of things. And that's not something that I had to do. It's not something I can do. So that was the various stages. That was probably the problems.
So let's talk about actually distributing The Pinch. It's on Amazon. It's on which other ones, Ashley? You should probably mention this, not me.
Yeah.
I was about to do that.
Yeah. So as we speak today, I'm sure this podcast will be released well into the future. But as we speak today, here in early December 2018, we just went live on Amazon this week. Next week, I think we're going live on iTunes and Google Play, and then a couple weeks after that, we're going on Vudu. So we'll be slowly pushing out, and it just sort of depended on how quickly we could get up the things. I ended up using a service called Bitmax, and it's one of these aggregators. There's another one that's very big, Distributor. I'm sure a lot of people have heard of that. I just found Bitmax to be a little cheaper, honestly. I've heard good things about distributors, so there wasn't a lot of thought. I had a friend who had used Bitmax and had a good experience with them, so really that was the reason I went with them over any of the other services. But those are not distributors; those are aggregators, and all they really do is you pay them a fee, and then they put your movie out on these various VOD platforms, but they don't take a percentage of the money. You pay them a flat fee up front, and then you get to keep 100% of the money that Amazon or Apple or whoever sends you. That money flows back directly to you. So that felt like a good way of doing it for this particular movie. But that's how I did it. It was through a company called Bitmax, and it's all the, eventually we'll get on all the sort of the main VOD platforms.
Yeah, actually, this episode's coming up next.
Okay,
so
cool.
we're releasing. This is being recorded December the 5th. It'll most likely be up tomorrow.
Oh, perfect! Wow, you're quick. Yeah, I usually have a little leeway, so mine when I record them, it could be a month or more. But yeah, no, that's fantastic. So so check it out on Amazon. If you're listening to this before, let's say about December 10th, check it out on Amazon, and then as I said, a week later, it'll be on iTunes and then Google Play and Vudu soon after.
Well, see, what happened was I've been off for a month because I moved, and it's like I couldn't record it all. And I'm still not done moving. I'm actually recording this in my kitchen. So
I got you. Yeah, you mentioned that. Yeah. So no worries. So that's cool.
So cool, Ash. We're in closing. Where can people find The Pinch at, or even you? Where can people find you at?
Yeah. So, and actually, I forgot to mention one other thing about The Pinch. So I also set up The Pinch. You can buy it directly from my blog and podcast, sellingyourscreenplay.com. So if you go to sellingyourscreenplay.com/The Pinch, all lowercase, all one word, The Pinch. If you go there, you can buy the movie directly from me. The other thing that I offer, if you go there, for an extra $5, you can get a 3-hour webinar. After I did The Pinch, I recorded a 3-hour webinar, and this was actually one of the things I offered to my Kickstarter audience was this webinar. If you kick in money, I'll do this webinar where I go through the whole process. And it is literally a 3-hour webinar. And I spent a lot of time creating the outline and creating the materials for that webinar. And I go through in very granular detail the whole process of making the movie. So you can, if you buy it directly from me, you can add that to the purchase of The Pinch. And then, so that's a better, for me anyways, that's a better things. And it might be interesting. Certainly you have a lot of filmmakers that are listening to this. And so you might be real curious to watch the movie and then hear the 3-hour webinar, which is kind of the making of The Pinch. So definitely check out that sellingyourscreenplay.com/The Pinch. And you can just learn more about the film on there, see the trailer, the poster, and the log line, that kind of stuff. But mainly, I would say sellingyourscreenplay.com. I have a weekly podcast as well that comes out. And as I mentioned, it's mostly filmmakers, screenwriters. Obviously it's geared more towards screenwriters, but it's screenwriters and directors, producers that come on and typically talk about their latest film and how they wrote it, and then ultimately how they got it produced.
Yeah, and it's a fantastic podcast.
Hey, well, thank you.
So, because I was actually I don't know if you know this guy, but there's a mutual friend I met. We met a while ago, and we actually were at the Robert McKee's story seminar in April 2016. We both had won competitions to get in there. And we were at Robert Keys, and he actually goes, "Oh yeah," he goes, "I listen to Ashley's podcast sometimes," and I go, "Yeah, I actually know him," and then we got to talking, and then it was just one of those things. Small world, so.
Yeah, it is, and I'm really finding, sort of the independent filmmaking world. Just coincidentally, one time I was listening to Scott over at Film Trooper, and he had literally, it was this guy, I hadn't talked to him in. He was my brother's roommate in college, and he went on to be a filmmaker. And it was a guy named Chris White, and I just coincidentally turned on the Film Trooper podcast, and he was the guest on that. And I thought, wow, what a small world it really is, because this was a guy I met in like 1992 when my brother was in college. Haven't heard from him or seen him since. So it really is, as you sort of get into the industry, it is a small world. And that's one piece of parting advice. I always tell people, like, you got to just get out there and do it. And The Pinch isn't the greatest movie in the world. It's a low budget, and there's definitely things, but I'm getting it out there. And it's like, if you want to be a filmmaker, go make a film, even if that means a 3-minute short on your iPhone. Make it. Maybe it just goes on YouTube. Maybe you get it into some festivals. But exactly what you're just talking about, you'll run into people and you'll meet people, and that's networking. Like, that's a lot of what this business is meeting people, knowing people, and the only way you can really do that is by getting out there and doing it. Like, it's ironic, like listening to a podcast, it's like that's not going to really move your career forward. What's going to really move your career forward is actually getting out there and making a film. If you're in your car driving to work, sure, listen to a podcast, listen to what Dave has to say and what Ashley has to say, and maybe we can give you some advice, and I hope that we can. But at the end of the day, you got to do the work. You got to go sit in front of your computer, and you got to just start writing a script, and you got to get out there and you got to produce your movie.
Yeah, and I think that is a fantastic way to put a period at the end of this whole conversation, Ashley. Everyone, it's Perfect. The show notes are at davebullis.com. Twitter, it's at DB Podcast. Ash, we're going to have you back on in like 2 years. And then another 2 years, because it's always around this time. Right around this time, and then you can tell us all the numbers and stuff like that. But
I'd love to. Hopefully, I'll have some good numbers to report.
See, that's when you can be like too famous and too big for me now, and then at that point, you know what I mean.
Yeah,
I have to be like, I actually knew this guy once, and
I promise you, Dave, that will never happen.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it, man. Because some of the guests I've had on, if I know what some of them are working on, and I'm just waiting for one of them to just like rocket to superstardom. You know what I mean? Like I still talk to a lot of my guests. And they're always talk about what they're working on, and I'm always waiting for one of them to just kind of like rocket to superstardom. And I kind of try to like go, hey man, what's going on? And I'm just going, no, sorry, Dave, I don't have time for you. You're down there now. But
and on that note, like I legitimately, and I'm sure you do this too, like I legitimately answer the email that comes to Selling Your Screenplay, and I try, I encourage people to go look at my FAQ first before emailing me, but I'm just a guy trying to make some cool movies, trying to sell some scripts. And if someone has a question, they can email me too. It's like info@sellingyourscreenplay.com. That's my email address. I will really look at that. Again, go to sellingyourscreenplay.com/FAQ first, because I've answered a lot of questions a lot of times, and I've put those FAQ ones up there. So there's no point answering the same question over and over again. But, I try and just give back as well. And I know that's what you're doing too, with your podcast and your stuff. So we're all in it together, and we're all trying to help each other.
Yeah, and this my podcast started as an experiment. Really, it just started as an experiment. Now it's like a Frankenstein's monster. I can't. Yeah. It's gotten so big I can't control it anymore. It's like, I have so many emails that I are unanswered, and it's just because as soon as I sit down to answer an email, I'll maybe answer a few, and then something comes, I gotta go put out a fire somewhere. You know what I mean? So
I know exactly. Yeah.
But when people say, "Hey, Dave, I want to start a podcast. What's your advice?" I'm like, "Don't start one. And keep your sanity, and you'll do a lot better." So hopefully more people will listen to that advice. But Ashley, again, thanks a lot for coming on, man. I'm gonna check.
Thanks
out the
for
Pinch.
having me.
Hey, no problem, man. I'm gonna check out the Pinch, and I wish you the best of luck, my friend.
You too, man, Dave. Always a pleasure.
Find Dave at davebullis.com. Please make sure to subscribe and share the podcast.